The burgundy silk of Luna's prom dress caught the gymnasium's disco lights like spilled wine as she stood frozen in the doorway, watching her sister Celeste slow dance with Marcus, her Marcus, to Perfect by Ed Sheeran. The corsage Luna had carefully chosen that morning, white roses with baby's breath, wilted against her wrist as her world tilted on its axis. The Riverside High School gymnasium, transformed with twinkling fairy lights and silver streamers, suddenly felt suffocating despite its soaring ceiling and industrial ventilation system that hummed like a mechanical heartbeat above the music. Luna's best friend Mia grabbed her elbow, her emerald green dress rustling as she leaned close. "Luna, breathe. Just breathe." But Luna couldn't breathe. She could only stare at the way Marcus's hands rested on Celeste's lower back, the same way they'd rested on hers during their practice dance sessions in her bedroom just 2 weeks ago. The same hands that had traced her jawline during their first kiss under the old oak tree behind the school library. The same hands that had interlaced with hers during countless movie nights now belonged to someone else entirely. "I don't understand," Luna whispered, her voice barely audible above the DJ's bass that thrummed through the polished concrete floor. "He picked me up 3 hours ago. We took pictures in Mom's garden. He told me I looked beautiful." The memory felt surreal now, like something that had happened to someone else entirely. Marcus had arrived at their house at exactly 4 o'clock in his father's black sedan, wearing a classic black tuxedo with a bow tie that matched her dress perfectly. He'd fumbled with the corsage, his hands shaking slightly as he slipped it over her wrist, and she'd thought it was nerves about prom, about the night they'd both been anticipating for months. "Where did he even go?" Mia asked, scanning the crowd of swaying couples. "You guys walked in together, got punched, took those photos by the balloon arch." Her voice trailed off as they both realized the timeline didn't make sense. Marcus had excused himself to the bathroom 20 minutes ago, right after they'd joined their group of friends at the round table decorated with silver and navy centerpieces. Luna had been adjusting her makeup in her compact mirror, touching up the subtle smoky eyes she'd spent an hour perfecting, when she looked up to find him gone. Now here he was, not emerging from the boys' bathroom, but wrapped in her sister's arms as if they'd been dancing together all night. Celeste wore a stunning midnight blue gown that hugged her curves perfectly, her blonde hair swept up in an elegant chignon that showcased the diamond earrings their grandmother had given her for her 18th birthday. She was everything Luna wasn't. Confident where Luna was cautious, effortlessly beautiful where Luna had to work for every compliment, naturally magnetic where Luna had to fight for attention even in her own family. The gymnasium, which had hosted countless basketball games and assemblies throughout Luna's 4 years at Riverside High, felt like a foreign country now. The familiar scent of industrial floor cleaner and adolescent cologne was masked by the rental company's artificial rose fragrance from the balloon arrangements. But underneath it all, Luna could still smell the ghost of every championship game, every school dance, every moment that had led to this one. The walls, painted in the school's colors of navy and silver, were draped with yards of tulle and twinkling lights that cast dancing shadows across the crowd of students she'd grown up with since kindergarten. "Luna?" came a gentle voice behind her. She turned to see Jake Martinez approaching, looking handsome in his charcoal gray tuxedo, his usually unruly dark-haired tamed with gel. Jake had been her lab partner in AP chemistry, the quiet artist who sat in the back row and drew intricate sketches in the margins of his notebooks when he thought no one was looking. "I saw what happened," he asked. "Are you okay?" Luna shook her head, unable to form words. The question felt absurd. Was anyone okay when their entire understanding of reality crumbled in the span of a 3-minute song? The disco ball overhead cast fragments of light across her face, and she felt as shattered as those reflected pieces, unable to see the whole picture of what had just destroyed her perfect night.
"Something's not right," Jake said, his dark eyes serious behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "I've been watching Marcus all night. He keeps checking his phone, looking over his shoulder, and he's been talking to Coach Williams and Mr. Peterson a lot. More than any student should be talking to faculty at prom." Jake had always been observant, the kind of person who noticed details others missed. In chemistry class, he was the first to spot when their experiments went off track, the one who caught measurement errors before they ruined entire batches of compounds. Luna followed Jake's gaze across the gymnasium to where Coach Williams stood near the refreshment table, his imposing frame barely contained by his navy suit. Coach Williams was a legend at Riverside High, having led the football team to 3 state championships in his 15-year tenure. But tonight, instead of his usual boisterous laughter and backslapping with parents and alumni, he stood with his arms crossed, his weathered face serious, as his eyes swept the crowd with an intensity that seemed out of place at a high school dance. "And look at Mr. Peterson," Jake continued, nodding toward their AP government teacher, who stood near the main entrance. Mr. Peterson, usually rumpled and academic in his daily uniform of khaki pants and button-down shirts, looked sharp in a black suit, but his position seemed strategic rather than social. He wasn't mingling with other chaperones or smiling at the students' elaborate entrances. Instead, he maintained a clear view of both the main doors and the emergency exits, his posture rigid with what Luna was beginning to recognize as professional alertness. "They look like they're working," Mia observed, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Not chaperoning, working." She'd always been the most intuitive of their friend group, the one who could sense when something was off before anyone else caught on. Now her green eyes were wide with concern as she studied the adults scattered throughout the venue. The song changed to something upbeat, "Shut Up and Dance" by Walk the Moon, and the crowd's energy shifted, but Luna felt increasingly disconnected from the celebration around her. Students she'd known for years seemed like strangers as they laughed and danced, their faces unfamiliar in the colored lights. The elaborate decorations that had taken the prom committee 3 days to install looked garish now, like props in a play she no longer understood her role in. "There's Mrs. Chen from the front office," Jake pointed out, indicating our school secretary, who stood near the stage where the DJ had set up his equipment. Mrs. Chen, who usually wore cardigans and comfortable flats, was dressed in a sharp pantsuit and seemed to be coordinating something with the DJ using subtle hand signals. "She's not even supposed to be here tonight. She told my mom she had other plans." Luna's stomach churned as the pieces of an invisible puzzle began to take shape. The adults positioned throughout the gymnasium weren't just chaperoning, they were stationed. The casual way they maintained visual contact with each other, the professional awareness in their postures, the fact that none of them seemed to be enjoying what should have been a joyful celebration of their student's milestone moment. It all pointed to something Luna couldn't quite name, but definitely didn't like. "Where's your phone?" Mia asked. "Try calling Marcus. If he's really just switching dance partners for some reason, he'll answer." Luna fumbled in her small beaded clutch, her hands trembling as she retrieved her phone. The screen showed 3 missed calls from her mother, which was odd, because Mom knew she'd be at prom at least midnight. She scrolled to Marcus's contact. The photo showed him laughing at last month's spring formal, his arm around her shoulders as they posed in front of the decorated archway at the country club. His smile looked genuine in the picture, the same smile that had convinced her she was falling in love over their 8 months of dating.
"He declined my call," Luna said, her voice hollow with disbelief. "Then he turned off his phone." The implication hit her like a physical blow. Marcus wasn't just dancing with her sister, he was actively avoiding her, deliberately shutting her out on what was supposed to be one of the most important nights of their high school careers. The gymnasium's air conditioning kicked on with a mechanical wheeze, sending a chill through the decorated space that made Luna shiver, despite the warm May evening outside. Through the high windows, she could see the parking lot where limousines and decorated cars waited to take couples to after-parties and late-night diners. Her own plans, dinner at the new Italian restaurant downtown, then the senior class bonfire at Miller's Beach, felt like relics of another person's life. "Luna," Jake said gently, "I think you should call your parents."
Before Luna could respond, the music cut out abruptly. The sudden silence was jarring after 2 hours of constant bass and melody, and conversations throughout the gymnasium faltered as students looked around in confusion. The DJ, a middle-aged man with a goatee who'd been hired for dozens of school events over the years, wasn't touching his equipment. Instead, he stood frozen behind his turntables, his hands raised slightly, as if someone had told him to stop what he was doing. Principal Morrison's voice crackled through the sound system, his usual warm tone replaced by something formal and uncomfortable. "Ladies and gentlemen, we need everyone to remain calm and stay exactly where you are. We're going to have some special visitors who need to speak with a few students. This is just a precautionary measure and prom will resume shortly." But Luna knew, with the terrible certainty that sometimes accompanies life's worst moments, that prom would not resume shortly, that nothing would ever be quite the same. The fairy lights continued to twinkle overhead, the decorations remained beautiful, but the magic had been broken by something much larger and more dangerous than teenage heartbreak. Through the main entrance, Luna could see figures in dark suits entering the gymnasium, their movements purposeful and coordinated. Not parents arriving late, not school board members checking on the event, but professionals with badges and serious expressions who scanned the crowd with the same methodical attention she'd noticed in the faculty chaperones. "FBI," Jake whispered, his face pale in the colored lights. "Those are FBI agents." The federal agents moved through the gymnasium like sharks through a school of tropical fish, their presence causing ripples of nervous energy that spread from group to group of students. Luna pressed closer to Mia and Jake, seeking comfort in their familiar warmth as her mind raced to process what was happening. Everything about this night, about the past few months really, suddenly felt like scenes from someone else's life, moments she'd lived without truly understanding their significance. She thought about Marcus's behavior over the past few weeks, details that seemed quirky or endearing at the time, but now felt ominous in retrospect. The way he'd started carrying 2 phones, claiming one with his father's old device he used for music. How he'd begun suggesting they skip their usual Friday night hangouts at the Riverside drive-in, preferring to stay in and watch Netflix instead. The sudden interest in her family's routines, asking when her parents worked late, when Celeste had dance practice, when the house would be empty. "I need to sit down," Luna whispered, her legs suddenly unsteady. Jake guided her to one of the round tables draped in silver tablecloths, pulling out a chair that scraped against the gymnasium floor with a sound that seemed amplified in the strange new atmosphere of the interrupted dance. The centerpiece, a crystal vase filled with navy and silver flowers, caught the overhead lights and cast small rainbows across the white tablecloth, a beautiful detail that felt surreal against the backdrop of federal agents and whispered conversations. "My mom knows," Luna said, showing the text to Mia and Jake. "She knows something about Marcus." The words felt foreign in her mouth, like she was speaking a language she'd never learned. 6 months ago, Marcus had been just another senior at Riverside High, the new kid who'd transferred from Phoenix and charmed his way into the popular crowd with his easy smile and quick wit. He'd asked Luna to homecoming with an elaborate poster featuring her favorite Disney princess, Belle, surrounded by yellow roses and a quote about adventures in books. Their first official date had been at the Riverside Autumn Festival, where Marcus had won her a giant stuffed elephant at the ring toss game, displaying a level of coordination that had impressed her friends and made her feel special. He'd been patient when she'd been nervous about their first kiss, gentle when she'd struggled with calculus, supportive when she'd auditioned for the lead in the spring musical. He'd seemed perfect. Too perfect, she was beginning to realize. Jake was watching the federal agents work their way through the crowd, his artistic eye cataloging details that others might miss. "They have photos," he said quietly. "Each agent has a small stack of headshots, and they're comparing faces to the pictures. They're looking for specific people, not just asking random questions." Luna watched as Agent Reyes, a woman in a sharp black pantsuit with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, approached a group of seniors near the DJ booth. She spoke quietly to each student, showing them something from a manila folder before moving on when they shook their heads. The students' faces reflected confusion and growing anxiety as word spread through the gymnasium that this wasn't a routine check or a minor disruption. Ms. Rodriguez? Luna turned to find Agent Martinez, a younger man with kind eyes who somehow knew her name without introduction. I'm Special Agent Martinez with the FBI. I need to speak with you about Marcus Webb. Is he your date tonight? The question felt like a trap, though Luna couldn't understand why. Yes, she said carefully, her voice barely above a whisper. But he's dancing with my sister right now. She gestured toward the dance floor, where Celeste and Marcus had moved from slow dancing to what looked like an intense conversation near the stage. Even from across the gymnasium, Luna could see the tension in their postures, the way Celeste's face had shifted from flirtatious enjoyment to something that looked like fear. Agent Martinez followed her gaze and spoke quietly into a small microphone clipped to his jacket collar. Target is on the dance floor with secondary subject, moving to intercept. The clinical language sent a chill through Luna's chest. Target. Marcus was a target, not a high school senior getting ready for college, not her boyfriend of 8 months who knew she liked extra butter on her popcorn and always let her pick the movie. Am I in trouble? Luna asked, her voice small and childlike despite her 18 years. The question came from a place of pure confusion rather than guilt. She genuinely couldn't understand how her normal teenage life had intersected with federal law enforcement. No, Ms. Rodriguez, you're not in any trouble. But we need you to understand that Marcus Webb is not who he told you he was. Agent Martinez sat down beside her, his movements slow and non-threatening. How much do you know about his family, his life before he came to Riverside? Luna realized with growing horror that she knew almost nothing. Marcus had shared stories that felt personal and detailed at the time. Growing up in Phoenix, his father's job in construction, his mother's death from cancer when he was 14. But when she tried to recall specific details now, everything felt vague and rehearsed. He'd never shown her family photos, never video called with relatives, never received mail or packages at his apartment. She'd attributed his reticence to grief and a desire to start fresh in a new town. But now she wondered if it had been something else entirely. He said his dad got a job at the power plant, Luna said slowly, trying to remember the exact story Marcus had told her parents when they'd first met him. That's why they moved to Riverside. But he was always vague about details. When I asked what his father did exactly, he'd change the subject or make jokes. Agent Martinez nodded, making notes in a small leather notebook. Marcus Webb is 22 years old, not 18. His real name is Marcus Volkov, and his father is Dmitry Volkov, who we believe is running a sophisticated money laundering operation through legitimate businesses in at least 4 states. Marcus has been collecting information about local families, financial situations, community connections. We think he's been identifying targets for identity theft and financial fraud. The words hit Luna like physical blows. 22, not 18. Not her peer, not her equal, not the sweet boy who'd seemed nervous about asking her to prom. A grown man who'd been using her, lying to her, manipulating her with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this before. The fairy lights overhead suddenly seemed too bright, the gymnasium too small, the air too thin. I think I'm going to be sick, Luna whispered, pressing her hand to her stomach as nausea rolled through her in waves. Mia immediately moved closer, wrapping an arm around Luna's shoulders and murmuring soft comfort words, but nothing could ease the fundamental violation Luna felt. Every kiss, every conversation, every moment she'd thought was genuine had been performance art by someone whose real identity she'd never known. Did he ever ask you about your parents' work schedules? Your family's financial information? Whether you had house keys made for him? Agent Martinez's questions were gentle but persistent, and with each one, Luna remembered another moment that now felt sinister. Marcus asking about her mother's nursing schedule under the guise of planning surprise dates. His curiosity about her father's accounting firm and the clients he worked with. The way he'd offered to help with household chores so he could spend time at their house when her parents weren't home. He has a key to our house, Luna said, the realization hitting her like ice water.
My parents gave him one last month so he could let himself in when I was running late for musical rehearsals. The key, which had felt like such a significant step in their relationship, now represented something terrifying. A grown man with criminal connections had access to her family's home, their financial documents, their personal information. Agent Martinez spoke into his microphone again. Need immediate security sweep of the Rodriguez residence. Suspect has had access for approximately 30 days. Then, turning back to Luna, he said, "We're going to need you to call your parents and tell them to leave the house immediately. Don't let them pack anything. Don't let them stop to collect important documents. We'll help them with all of that later, but right now, we need them somewhere safe." Luna's hands shook as she dialed her mother's number, her mind struggling to process the complete upheaval of everything she thought she knew about her life. Through the phone, she could hear her mother moving around their familiar kitchen, probably cleaning up after dinner and waiting for Luna's call with updates about prom. The normalcy of the background sounds, the dishwasher running, the TV news in the living room, felt like artifacts from another world. "Mom," Luna said when her mother answered, surprised by how steady her voice sounded despite the chaos in her chest. "Mom and Dad need to leave the house right now. Don't ask questions. Don't pack anything. Just get in the car and drive to Aunt Carmen's house. The FBI agent here says it's urgent." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several heartbeats before her mother's nursing training kicked in, the same calm competence she used during medical emergencies. "Are you safe, mija? Are you hurt?" "I'm safe. But, Mom, Marcus isn't who we thought he was. He's not 18, and he's been lying to us about everything. They think he might have been using our family for some kind of criminal activity." Saying the words out loud made them feel more real, and Luna had to pause to steady her breathing. "We're leaving now," her mother said, without hesitation. "Your father is getting the car keys. Luna, stay with the agents, don't go anywhere alone, and don't trust anyone until we understand what's happening." After ending the call, Luna looked around the gymnasium with new eyes. The fairy lights and decorations that had seemed magical a few hours ago now felt like elaborate set pieces in a play she'd never auditioned for. Her classmates, dressed in their formal wear and still trying to salvage their prom experience, looked young and vulnerable in a way that hadn't been apparent before. She wondered how many other Marcus Webbs were out there, how many other families were being targeted by people who saw their trust and openness as weaknesses to exploit. "Miss Rodriguez," Agent Martinez said gently, "we're going to need you to help us understand Marcus's routine, his habits, the things he told you about his plans after graduation. I know this is overwhelming, but you might have information that could prevent him from hurting other families."
Luna nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. The corsage Marcus had given her earlier caught the light, its white roses now seeming like a mockery of innocence and new beginnings. She worked it off her wrist and set it on the table next to the centerpiece, a small but significant rejection of the lies that had shaped her recent months. Across the gymnasium, she could see other agents converging on the dance floor where Marcus and Celeste had been standing, but the couple had vanished. Luna's heart clenched with fear for her sister, beautiful, trusting Celeste, who never met a stranger, who saw the best in everyone, who had no idea she might be in danger from someone she'd thought was just her sister's harmless boyfriend. The search for Marcus and Celeste sent waves of organized chaos through the gymnasium as agents coordinated with local law enforcement and school administration. Luna found herself at the center of an investigation that felt surreal. Federal agents treating her prom like a crime scene. Her classmates' celebration interrupted by something that sounded like it belonged in a movie rather than her small-town life. The disco ball continued its lazy rotation overhead, casting fragments of light across the faces of confused students and grim-faced adults who were trying to maintain order while conducting what was clearly a high-stakes operation. Principal Morrison's voice crackled through the sound system again, his usual warmth replaced by carefully controlled authority. "Students, we need everyone to remain in the main gymnasium while our guests finish their work. Your parents have been contacted and will be picking you up shortly. Please stay with your friend groups and wait for your name to be called. The announcement sparked a new wave of whispered conversations and nervous laughter from students who were trying to process why their prom had become the setting for what looked like a federal investigation. Agent Martinez remained beside Luna, his presence somehow both comforting and unsettling as he continued his gentle questioning. Did Marcus ever mention having friends or contacts in other states? Maybe people he claimed to know from Phoenix or relatives he stayed in touch with? Each question revealed another gap in her knowledge about the person she thought she was falling in love with. She realized she'd never spoken to any of Marcus's supposed friends, never met anyone who'd known him before Riverside, never seen evidence of the life he claimed to have left behind in Arizona. There was this one time, Luna said slowly, remembering an incident from 3 weeks ago that had puzzled her at the time. We were at Riverside Mall, and this older man approached Marcus. He was maybe 40, wearing an expensive suit, and he spoke to Marcus in what sounded like Russian or maybe Polish. Marcus got really uncomfortable and told me the man had mistaken him for someone else, but they definitely knew each other. The man called him something that wasn't Marcus. It sounded like Misha or Mikhail. Agent Martinez's pen stopped moving across his notebook. Can you describe this man? Height, hair color, any distinguishing features? Luna closed her eyes, trying to recall details she hadn't paid much attention to at the time. Tall, maybe 6'2", dark hair with gray at the temples. He had this scar on his left hand like a burn mark, and he wore a gold signet ring. His accent was thick, and he seemed surprised to see Marcus. When Marcus hurried us away, he was shaking a little, and he kept looking over his shoulder for the rest of our time at the mall. The agent spoke quickly into his microphone, relaying Luna's description to his colleagues. Around them, Luna could hear fragments of similar conversations as other students were questioned about their interactions with Marcus over the months since he'd enrolled at Riverside High. Sarah Kim mentioned Marcus asking detailed questions about her family's restaurant business. Tommy Chen recalled Marcus being unusually interested in his father's real estate investments. A pattern was emerging that painted Marcus not as a teenage boy trying to fit into a new school, but as someone systematically gathering intelligence about the families and businesses in their small community. Luna, Mia said urgently, appearing at her elbow with Jake close behind. I just talked to my cousin Rico. He's a security guard at First National Bank downtown. He says there've been weird attempts to access customer information over the past month. Someone's been calling in with personal details about account holders, trying to get them to reveal security questions and account numbers. The calls stopped about 2 weeks ago, but Rico thinks they got information on at least a dozen families.
The implication sent a chill through Luna's chest. Marcus hadn't just been collecting information about her family. He'd been working a larger operation that targeted multiple families in Riverside. She thought about all the community events she'd attended with him over the past few months. The Founders Day Festival, where he'd mingled with local business owners, the high school fundraising dinner, where he'd charmed parents and learned about their work and financial situations, the volunteer cleanup day at Miller's Park, where he'd spent time with families from across the socioeconomic spectrum. He was mapping our entire community, Luna said, the realization hitting her with sickening clarity. Every event we went to, every person we met, he was collecting information about everyone. Agent Martinez nodded grimly. Marcus Volkov is part of what we call a sleeper cell operation. Young people who integrate into communities, build relationships, and systematically gather information that can be used for identity theft, financial fraud, and sometimes more serious crimes. They're trained to be charming, to blend in, to make people trust them completely. The word trained echoed in Luna's mind. Everything that had felt natural and romantic about their relationship, the way Marcus had known exactly what to say to win over her parents, his ability to fit seamlessly into her friend group, his perfect balance of attention and independence, had been the result of professional instruction in manipulation and deception.
She felt like she was drowning in the realization that she'd been nothing more than a mark in a sophisticated criminal operation. Through the gymnasium's main doors, Luna could see the parking lot filling with concerned parents, police cars, and what looked like additional federal vehicles. The romantic evening she'd planned and anticipated for months had become a law enforcement operation that would probably make the national news. She wondered if Marcus had planned all along for their relationship to end this way, or if something had gone wrong with whatever larger scheme he'd been pursuing. "There's something else," Jake said quietly, his voice tight with worry. "I've been thinking about why tonight, why prom. If Marcus was gathering information and building trust, why would he blow his cover by dancing with Luna's sister right in front of her? It doesn't make sense unless—" He paused, his face pale in the colored lights. "Unless what?" Luna asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. "Unless he was creating a distraction," Agent Martinez finished, his expression grim. "Or unless something spooked him and he needed to accelerate his timeline." He spoke into his microphone again, his voice urgent. "We need status on the Rodriguez residence sweep and location of secondary targets. If the subject changed his behavior pattern tonight, we might be dealing with a compromised operation." Luna's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Luna, this is Celeste. My phone died, but I borrowed one from a friend. Marcus and I are at Miller's Beach. Don't worry, everything's fine, but we need to talk to you about something important. Can you meet us there? Come alone and don't tell anyone where you're going. I'll explain everything when you get here." She stared at the message, her blood turning cold. Celeste never texted like that, formal and careful, missing her usual flood of emojis and casual slang. And Miller's Beach, the isolated stretch of shoreline where students sometimes went to party away from adult supervision, was exactly the kind of place someone would choose if they needed privacy for something dangerous. "She's in trouble," Luna said, showing the message to Agent Martinez. "That's not how Celeste texts, and she would never ask me to come alone to Miller's Beach at night. Something is wrong." The agent's face hardened as he read the message. "This is either Marcus trying to draw you out, or your sister is being coerced to sending messages. Either way, we're not letting you anywhere near that beach." He immediately began coordinating with his team. Luna could hear fragments of urgent communication about roadblocks, backup units, and tactical considerations that made her stomach clench with fear for her sister.
"But if she's really in danger," Luna began, standing up from her chair so quickly that it scraped against the gymnasium floor. "If she's in danger, the best thing you can do is let us handle it," Agent Martinez said firmly, but kindly. "Marcus Volkov is not a confused teenager, Luna. He's a trained operative who's been living a lie for months. If he has your sister, he's using her as leverage, and walking into his trap won't help anyone." Luna sank back into her chair, feeling helpless and terrified. The gymnasium around her had become a command center, with agents speaking in low, urgent voices and coordinating what looked like a major law enforcement operation. Her classmates, still in their formal wear but looking increasingly worried and confused, huddled in small groups as parents began arriving to collect them. The beautiful decorations and twinkling lights now felt like relics of her childhood innocence, reminders of a time when her biggest worry was whether her dress would photograph well and whether Marcus would like the boutonniere she'd chosen for him. "Ms. Rodriguez," Agent Reyes approached their table, her expression serious but compassionate. "We've established contact with your sister. She's safe, but she's being held at an undisclosed location. Marcus is using her to negotiate his safe passage out of the area. We're working on a resolution that will bring her home safely." The words "being held" and "negotiate" sent panic through Luna's system. Her sister, who was afraid of horror movies and still slept with a nightlight, was being used as a bargaining chip by someone Luna had trusted completely. The guilt was overwhelming. If she hadn't brought Marcus into our family, if she hadn't been so eager to believe his lies, if she'd paid attention to the warning signs that Jake and Mia had noticed but she'd dismissed, Celeste would be safe at home, instead of caught in the middle of a federal investigation. "This is my fault," Luna whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks and smearing the makeup she'd spent hours perfecting.
I brought him into our family. I gave him access to our house, our information, our trust. If something happens to Celeste—" "No, Luna," Mia said firmly, moving to wrap her arms around her best friend. "This is not your fault. You didn't know. You couldn't have known. Marcus is a professional criminal who was trained to deceive people. You're not responsible for his choices." But Luna couldn't shake the feeling that she should have been smarter, should have questioned his too perfect answers and his convenient explanations for the gaps in his story. She thought about all the true crime podcasts she listened to, all the TV shows about con artists and manipulators, and wondered how she'd fallen so completely for someone who was apparently following a textbook playbook for infiltrating and exploiting small communities. Agent Martinez's radio crackled with updates from the team at Miller's Beach. From the fragments Luna could hear, it sounded like Marcus had chosen his location well. The beach was only accessible by a single winding road, with plenty of opportunities for someone to spot approaching law enforcement. The tactical challenges of safely extracting Celeste from the situation were complicated by the terrain and Marcus's apparent familiarity with the area. "He's been planning this," Luna realized aloud. "All those times we went to Miller's Beach for bonfires and parties, he was studying the location, learning the layout, figuring out escape routes." Another wave of betrayal washed over her as she recognized that even their most casual romantic moments had been part of his larger deception. The sunset walks along the shoreline, the late-night conversations under the stars, the feeling of being young and in love in a beautiful place, all of it had been reconnaissance disguised as romance.
Her father joined the embrace, his accountant's logical mind already working through the implications of what they'd learned about Marcus. "We'll get through this," he said quietly. "We'll get Celeste back, and we'll deal with whatever damage he's done to our family. But right now, we focus on bringing your sister home safely." Agent Martinez approached the family group, his expression carefully controlled. "Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez, we need to brief you on what we've discovered about Marcus Volkov and the potential impact on your family's financial security. Our forensic accountants will need to examine your bank records, credit reports, and any personal documents Marcus might have had access to." Luna's father paled at the implications. As an accountant for small businesses throughout Riverside, he understood immediately how much damage someone with access to their financial information could inflict. "How long do we have before we know the full extent?" he asked, his professional training overriding his parental panic for the moment. "We're working as quickly as possible," Agent Martinez assured them, "but right now our priority is your daughter's safety. We have negotiators en route to Miller's Beach, and we're coordinating with state police to establish a secure perimeter." The gymnasium had transformed completely from the magical prom venue Luna had anticipated into something that resembled a disaster response center. Students were being released to their parents in small groups after brief interviews, while faculty members worked with federal agents to account for everyone who had been at the dance. The decorating committee's beautiful work, hours of hanging lights and arranging flowers, now seemed like elaborate set pieces for a drama none of them had wanted to star in. Mrs. Chen, their school secretary, who had been positioned near the DJ booth earlier, approached with a tablet in her hands and a worried expression on her usually cheerful face. "Agent Martinez, we've confirmed that Marcus Webb, or Volkov, had access to student records through the front office computer system. He volunteered to help with data entry for college applications and graduation requirements, and we gave him temporary credentials 3 weeks ago." The revelation hit Luna like a physical blow. Marcus hadn't just been gathering information through casual social interaction. He had official access to personal data for every student at Riverside High. Social security numbers, addresses, family emergency contacts, college plans, scholarship information, an entire database of young people's personal information had been accessible to someone working for a criminal organization. "This is bigger than we thought," Agent Reyes said, joining their conversation. "If he had access to student records, he could have been identifying targets beyond just the families he met socially. Scholarship recipients, students from wealthy families, kids planning to attend expensive colleges,
anyone whose financial situation made them interesting to identity thieves. Luna's father thought about her own college plans, her acceptance to State University with a partial scholarship that her family had celebrated just 2 months ago. Marcus had been at that celebration dinner, toasting her success and asking detailed questions about the scholarship process, the financial aid forms she'd completed, the bank accounts her parents had opened for her college expenses. At the time, his interest had seemed supportive and loving. Now, she wondered if he'd been calculating the potential value of compromising her family's financial security. "How many other families are at risk?" Luna's mother asked, her nursing instincts extending beyond her own family to the broader community she'd served for 15 years at Riverside General. "We're still assessing that," Agent Martinez admitted. "But based on what we've learned tonight, potentially dozens. Marcus was more thorough and had more access than we initially realized." Luna's phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "Luna, please, Celeste is getting scared, and I don't want anyone to get hurt. Just come to the beach alone, and we can work this out. I never meant for things to go this far. I care about you and your family. Marcus." The message made Luna's skin crawl with its false intimacy and implied threat. This person who had held her hand, kissed her goodnight, met her parents, and charmed her grandparents was now holding her sister hostage and pretending their relationship meant something real to him. The manipulation was sophisticated, acknowledging her emotional connection to him while using that connection to try to control her behavior. "He's getting desperate," Agent Martinez observed, reading the message over Luna's shoulder. "That's good news for our negotiators, but it also means he might make unpredictable decisions. We need to be prepared for multiple scenarios." Through the gymnasium windows, Luna could see the parking lot filling with more law enforcement vehicles, state police, local sheriff's deputies, and what looked like a tactical response unit were staging their equipment and coordinating with the federal agents. The small-town prom that should have been a celebration of her graduating class's achievements had become the center of a major criminal investigation that would probably be studied in law enforcement training programs for years to come. "Ms. Rodriguez," Agent Reyes said gently, "we're going to need you to stay close to us for the next few hours. Until we have Marcus in custody, you're potentially at risk. He's invested months in building a relationship with you, and he might see you as his best chance for negotiating a favorable outcome." The idea that she was now a potential target rather than just a victim sent fresh waves of fear through Luna's already overwhelmed system. She looked around the gymnasium at her classmates, most of whom were being taken home by worried parents, and realized that her night, her year probably, would be nothing like what she'd planned and dreamed about. Instead of celebrating with friends and looking forward to college, she would be dealing with the aftermath of having been systematically deceived and exploited by someone she'd trusted completely. Jake appeared at her side again, still in his charcoal tuxedo, but looking older and more serious than she'd ever seen him. "Luna, I've been thinking about something. Remember when Marcus started suggesting we all hang out more as a group? He kept pushing for us to include him in our friend circle, asking about everyone's families and plans. What if he wasn't just interested in you and your family? What if he was using you to get access to all of us?" The possibility that Marcus had seen her not just as a target, but as a pathway to her entire social network made Luna feel sick. She thought about all the group activities over the past few months, study sessions at various friends' houses, group dates to the movies and restaurants, the spring break trip to Mia's family cabin where Marcus had asked detailed questions about everyone's parents' jobs and financial situations. She'd been proud of how well he fit into her friend group, how much everyone liked him. Now she realized she might have been the vehicle for him to gather intelligence on a dozen families instead of just one. "We need to warn everyone," Luna said urgently. "If he had access to our friend group, if he was collecting information about all our families—" "We're already on it," Agent Martinez assured her. "Every family connected to students in your social circle is being contacted and advised to monitor their financial accounts and credit reports. We're treating this as a community-wide security breach." Luna's mother tightened her arms around her daughter, her practical nursing mind already working through the implications. How do we rebuild from something like this? How do we trust anyone again when someone can lie so completely and convincingly? It was a question Agent Martinez clearly heard often in his line of work. It takes time, he said honestly. And it takes understanding that most people are exactly who they say they are. Marcus Volkov is a professional criminal who was trained to deceive people. What happened to your family doesn't reflect on your judgment, it reflects on his skill at manipulation. But Luna wasn't sure she believed him. How could she trust her own instincts about people when she had been so completely wrong about someone she'd spent 8 months getting to know intimately? How could she ever feel safe in a relationship again when someone could perform love so convincingly while planning to destroy her family's financial security? The gymnasium sound system crackled to life again, but instead of Principal Morrison's voice, they heard Agent Reyes coordinating with the tactical team at Miller's Beach. The transmission was brief and coded, but Luna caught enough to understand that they had visual contact with Marcus and Celeste, that negotiations were beginning, and that the situation remained fluid and potentially volatile. Potentially volatile was law enforcement speak that made Luna's knees weak with fear for her sister. Celeste, who collected vintage Disney movies and still cried during sad commercials, was being held by someone who had proven himself capable of sophisticated deception and was now facing federal charges that could result in decades in prison.
Terrified her sister must be, or how she was processing the revelation that her sister's boyfriend was actually a criminal who had been using their entire family. The call came through Agent Martinez's radio at 11:47 p.m., crackling with static and tension from Miller's Beach. Luna held her breath as she listened to the coded updates from the tactical team, her parents flanking her in a protective huddle that felt both comforting and insufficient against the magnitude of what was unfolding 12 miles away at the isolated shoreline where she'd shared what she'd thought were romantic moments with Marcus. "Suspect is cooperating with negotiation protocols," came the voice through the radio. "Secondary subject appears unharmed but distressed. We have confirmation that suspect is willing to release the hostage in exchange for guaranteed safe passage to international waters." Agent Martinez's jaw tightened as he processed the transmission. "He's not getting safe passage anywhere," he said grimly, then spoke into his microphone. "Continue negotiations but make no commitments regarding transport. Priority is safe recovery of the hostage." Luna's father, his accountant's mind, still working despite the emotional chaos, asked the question Luna was afraid to voice. What happens if he realizes he's not getting what he wants? What does that mean for Celeste? The agent's hesitation before answering told Luna everything she needed to know about how dangerous the situation had become. "We have contingency plans," he said carefully. "Our negotiators are trained for exactly this type of scenario." Through the gymnasium's main doors, Luna could see local news vans arriving in the parking lot, their satellite dishes and bright lights turning Riverside High School into the center of a media circus that would probably attract national attention by morning. The story had everything reporters loved: a high school prom, federal agents, international crime, and a young woman held hostage by someone who had infiltrated a small American community. Luna realized that her private heartbreak and her family's violation were about to become public entertainment for millions of strangers. "We need to prepare you for what's coming," Agent Reyes said, approaching the Rodriguez family with a tablet in her hands. "This story is going to be big news, and there will be significant media attention. We can provide some protection and guidance, but your lives are going to change dramatically over the next few weeks." Luna stared at the tablet screen, which showed early social media posts about the FBI raid at Riverside High Prom and federal investigation into Russian spy ring. The details were mostly wrong, but the photos were all too real. Images of students in formal wear being questioned by federal agents, police cars surrounding the school, and her own face visible in several shots as she sat with Agent Martinez. Her private humiliation was already becoming public spectacle for millions of strangers. "I can't handle this," Luna whispered, overwhelmed by the realization that her poor judgment and naivete were about to be analyzed and criticized by strangers across the country. "Everyone's going to know how stupid I was, how easily I believed his lies." Her mother's nursing instincts kicked in, the same calm competence she used with frightened patients and their families. "You are not stupid, Luna. You are a 17-year-old girl who trusted someone who presented himself as trustworthy. That makes you normal, not naive."
But Luna could already imagine the comments on news articles and social media posts, people questioning how she could have been so blind, criticizing her family for giving a virtual stranger access to their home and personal information, analyzing every decision she'd made through the lens of hindsight and superior knowledge. The violation of her trust was bad enough. Having it dissected by the entire internet felt unbearable. Jake, who had remained close to the Rodriguez family throughout the evening, offered a different perspective that reflected his artistic sensibilities and natural empathy. Luna, you're not the villain in this story. You're not even a supporting character. You're the victim of someone who is professionally trained to deceive people. The only person who should be embarrassed is Marcus, and he's probably incapable of real shame.
Agent Martinez's radio crackled again with an update that changed everything. Suspect has provided intelligence regarding larger operation in exchange for reduced charges. We have confirmation of at least 12 families in the immediate area with compromised financial information, and evidence of coordination with similar operations in Oregon, Nevada, and Colorado. The scope of what they were dealing with suddenly became clear. Marcus hadn't just been a single criminal targeting Luna's family. He'd been part of a network that was systematically infiltrating small communities across the western United States. Luna's relationship with him had been one small piece of a much larger criminal enterprise that probably involved hundreds of families and millions of dollars in stolen identities and financial fraud. This is a federal case that's been under investigation for 8 months, Agent Reyes explained, showing them files on her tablet that contained photos and intelligence reports. Marcus Volkov was recruited specifically to infiltrate your community because Riverside fits a particular profile. Affluent enough to be profitable targets, small enough that newcomers don't attract suspicion, with a strong sense of community that makes people trusting and welcoming. Luna stared at the files, which contained detailed analyses of Riverside's demographics, economic indicators, and social structures. Her hometown had been selected by criminals the same way companies selected markets for new products, through careful research and strategic planning. The community pride that had made Riverside feel special and safe had actually made it vulnerable to people who understood how to exploit trust and goodwill. "We've identified the family who recruited Marcus," Agent Martinez said, showing them a photo of a middle-aged couple who looked like suburban parents, but were actually coordinators for an international identity theft ring. They've been operating under various identities for over a decade, moving from community to community and establishing what appeared to be legitimate businesses, while actually facilitating financial fraud. The photos showed people Luna vaguely recognized. She thought she'd seen them at community events over the past year, but they'd been background figures, the kind of friendly adults who blended into any small-town gathering. The realization that her community had been under attack for months without anyone realizing it made her feel fundamentally unsafe in a way she'd never experienced before. "What about the other students Marcus was gathering information about?" Luna asked, thinking about her classmates who were still being questioned by agents throughout the gymnasium. "Are their families at risk too?" "We're still assessing the full scope," Agent Reyes admitted. "But based on what we've learned from Marcus's cooperation, yes, there are probably several families who will need to take immediate steps to protect their financial security. Some may have already experienced unauthorized access to bank accounts or credit applications." Luna's phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Sarah Kim. "Luna, someone tried to open a credit card in my mom's name yesterday. The bank called us because it was suspicious. Do you think this is connected to what happened tonight?" The message sent ice through Luna's veins as she realized the criminal operation Marcus had been part of was already causing real damage to real families in her community. She showed the text to Agent Martinez, who immediately began coordinating with other agents to contact the Kim family and add them to the list of potential victims who needed immediate financial protection. "This is going to destroy our community," Luna said, overwhelmed by the guilt of having been the pathway through which criminals had accessed so many innocent families. Her father, who had been quietly processing the magnitude of the situation, spoke up with the logical thinking that made him successful as an accountant. "Luna, If this operation has been active for 8 months and involves multiple states, it's much bigger than your relationship with Marcus. You didn't cause this. You were selected as a target because you fit a profile that made you useful to them. But Luna couldn't shake the feeling that she should have been smarter, should have questioned Marcus's too convenient answers and his perfect integration into our community. She thought about all the warning signs she dismissed, the way he never received mail at his apartment, his reluctance to video chat with supposed relatives, his vague answers about his life in Phoenix, his unusual interest in her friends' family situations.
Agent Martinez's radio crackled with the update they'd all been waiting for. Hostage is secure, suspect is in custody, no injuries. Repeat, hostage is secure and unharmed. The relief that flooded through Luna's body was so intense, it made her dizzy. Celeste was safe. Her beautiful, trusting sister, who had somehow gotten caught in the middle of a criminal operation, was alive and unharmed and would be coming home. Luna burst into tears that felt like they came from somewhere deeper than emotion, from the primal fear and guilt that had been consuming her since she'd first seen Marcus dancing with her sister at what was supposed to be their perfect prom. "They're bringing her back here," Agent Reyes said, coordinating the logistics through her radio. "ETA is approximately 20 minutes. She'll need to be debriefed, but she's safe and asking for her family." Luna's parents embraced her again, their relief palpable as the immediate crisis resolved into something they could begin to process and recover from. But Luna knew that while Celeste's physical safety was no longer in question, the emotional and financial aftermath of Marcus's deception would be affecting their family and their entire community for months or years to come. The gymnasium, which had been Luna's high school sanctuary for 4 years, the site of pep rallies and basketball games, school plays and graduation rehearsals, would forever be associated in her mind with the night her entire understanding of trust and safety had been shattered by someone she'd thought she loved. The fairy lights and decorations that had taken days to install would be taken down tomorrow, but the memory of federal agents questioning students in formal wear would linger much longer. "Ms. Rodriguez," Agent Martinez said gently, "we're going to need you to work with us over the next few weeks as we build our case against the larger criminal network. Your information about Marcus's behavior and contacts could be crucial for protecting other communities from similar operations." Luna nodded, understanding that her role in this story was far from over. Instead of starting college in the fall with nothing but excitement and anticipation, she would be spending her summer working with federal agents to help prosecute the people who had violated her family's trust and compromised her community's security. The future she'd planned and dreamed about had been altered by someone who had never cared about her at all, who had seen her as nothing more than a useful tool in a criminal enterprise. But as she waited for her sister to return safely from Miller's Beach, Luna began to understand that while she had been victimized by Marcus's deception, she had also been strong enough to recognize when something was wrong and brave enough to trust the people who were trying to help her. The fairy lights overhead continued to twinkle, casting the same magical glow that had enchanted her earlier in the evening, and she realized that even though her innocence had been lost, her capacity for love and trust didn't have to be destroyed entirely. 3 weeks after prom night, Luna sat in the FBI's regional field office, a sterile building of beige walls and fluorescent lighting that felt like the opposite of everything beautiful about her hometown. The conference room table was covered with files, photographs, and financial documents that represented the systematic destruction of trust Marcus Volkov and his associates had inflicted on not just Riverside, but communities across 4 states. Agent Martinez sat across from me, his patient demeanor unchanged, despite the countless hours they had spent together reconstructing the timeline of Marcus's infiltration into her life and community. "The financial impact assessment is complete," Agent Martinez said, sliding a thick folder across the table. 37 families in Riverside have been affected to some degree. The total attempted fraud amounts to over $2 million.
though we were able to prevent most of the transactions from completing once we understood the scope of the operation. Luna opened the folder with hands that had grown steadier over the past few weeks, though she still felt a jolt of anxiety every time she saw documentation of how thoroughly Marcus had violated her community's trust. The list of affected families read like a directory of everyone she'd ever cared about: her classmates' parents, her teachers, her neighbors, the local business owners who had watched her grow up and celebrated her achievements. The Kim family lost $4,000 before we could stop unauthorized credit card activity. Luna read aloud with her voice catching slightly. The Martinezes had someone attempt to refinance their mortgage using stolen documentation. The Chen's restaurant business account was accessed, though no funds were transferred. Each line item represented not just financial damage, but the violation of families who had welcomed Marcus into their community with the generous trust that small towns are known for.
We've been able to recover most of the stolen funds and prevent the majority of attempted fraud, Agent Martinez assured her. But the emotional impact is going to last much longer. Communities like Riverside pride themselves on being welcoming to newcomers, and this kind of systematic deception can make people suspicious and closed off for years. Luna understood exactly what he meant. In the 3 weeks since prom night, Riverside had felt different, not just to her, but to everyone. Neighbors who used to wave and chat over garden fences now seemed more guarded. Local businesses that had always operated on handshakes and personal relationships were requiring more documentation and verification. The easy trust that had made their community special was being replaced by wariness and second-guessing that felt foreign and sad. "How is Celeste adjusting?" Agent Martinez asked, his concern genuine despite the professional distance he maintained. Celeste's sister had been physically unharmed during her hours at Miller's Beach, but the psychological impact of being held by someone she'd thought was just her sister's boyfriend had been significant. "She's in therapy," Luna said simply. "Mom found her a counselor who specializes in trauma, and she's been going twice a week. Some days are better than others. She still has nightmares sometimes, and she gets anxious when she's alone. But she's stronger than I gave her credit for. She's actually been helping other families understand what happened and cope with the financial recovery process." Celeste's transformation from the carefree, flirtatious girl who had danced with Marcus at prom into someone who understood the serious implications of systematic deception had been remarkable to witness. She'd thrown herself into community recovery efforts with a determination that surprised everyone who knew her, organizing support groups for affected families and working with local banks to streamline the process of securing compromised accounts. "What about college?" Agent Martinez asked. "Are you still planning to attend State University in the fall?" Luna had been dreading this question because she still didn't have a clear answer. Her acceptance to State University remained valid, and her partial scholarship hadn't been affected by the criminal investigation. But everything about her future felt uncertain now. The idea of leaving Riverside while her community was still recovering from Marcus's operation felt like abandonment. The excitement she had once felt about starting college had been replaced by a sense of responsibility to help repair what had been broken. "I've deferred enrollment for a year," Luna said, surprising herself by how definitive she sounded. "I want to stay in Riverside and help with the recovery efforts. There are a lot of elderly residents who don't understand technology or financial systems well enough to protect themselves from future fraud. I want to help them, and I want to help our community develop better protocols for welcoming newcomers without being vulnerable to this kind of exploitation." The decision had crystallized over the past week as Luna worked with local officials to develop educational programs about financial security and identity protection. She'd discovered that she had a talent for explaining complex concepts in ways that made sense to people, and that helping others understand and protect themselves from the kind of deception she'd experienced was giving her a sense of purpose that felt more meaningful than any college plans she had previously made. "That's admirable," Agent Martinez said, and Luna could tell he meant it. "But you need to be careful not to let Marcus Volkov's actions define your entire future. You're 18 years old, Luna. You have decades ahead of you to build the life you want. Don't sacrifice your dreams because of what someone else did to you."
But Luna wasn't sure her dreams had been sacrificed. They had evolved. The girl who had worried about prom dresses and college social life felt like someone else entirely. The woman she was becoming was more interested in systemic problems and community resilience, in understanding how trust could be both protected and rebuilt after it had been systematically violated. I've been accepted to serve as a youth representative on the new Community Safety and Financial Education Task Force, Una said, showing Agent Martinez the official letter from the city of Riverside. It's a position they created specifically to address what happened with Marcus and to prevent similar situations in the future. I'll be working with local law enforcement, banking officials, and community leaders to develop educational programs and early warning systems. The task force was one of several institutional changes that had emerged from the crisis Marcus had created. The Riverside Police Department had established new protocols for investigating suspected financial fraud. Local banks had implemented additional verification procedures for new account openings and loan applications. The high school had completely overhauled its volunteer and visitor policies to prevent unauthorized access to student records. "What about your personal recovery?" Agent Martinez asked, his question gentle but direct. "How are you processing everything that happened with Marcus? Have you been able to trust people again?" Luna considered the question carefully. The pain of Marcus's deception had been unlike anything she'd experienced before. Not just the humiliation of being fooled, but the deeper violation of having someone she'd been intimate with turn out to be completely fabricated. For weeks after prom night, she had analyzed every interaction they'd had, looking for clues she'd missed, warning signs she should have recognized. "I'm learning to trust my instincts again," Luna said slowly. "At first, I thought I couldn't trust anyone because I'd been so wrong about Marcus. But my instincts weren't wrong. I knew something felt off during those last few weeks. I just didn't want to believe it. I ignored red flags because I wanted to believe in the relationship we'd built. Now I'm learning to listen to those warning signals instead of dismissing them." The therapeutic work she'd been doing with Dr. Sarah Chen, a counselor who specialized in helping victims of sophisticated fraud and manipulation, had been crucial in helping Luna understand that Marcus's deception reflected his criminal skills rather than her poor judgment. Learning about the psychology of con artists and the systematic methods they use to build trust helped Luna understand that she hadn't been unusually naive. She'd been targeted by someone professionally trained to exploit normal human emotions. "There's something else," Luna said, pulling out a thick manila folder she'd brought to their meeting. "I've been working on a project that I wanted to show you. It's a comprehensive guide for communities about how to protect themselves from the kind of infiltration Marcus carried out here." She opened the folder to reveal a detailed manual she had been developing with input from Dr. Chen, local law enforcement officials, and financial security experts. The guide included warning signs of systematic community infiltration, protocols for verifying newcomers' identities, educational materials about financial fraud protection, and resources for communities recovering from trust violations. "This is impressive work," Agent Martinez said, flipping through the pages with genuine interest. "Have you considered sharing this with other communities that have experienced similar situations?" "Actually," Luna said, feeling excited about her plans for the first time since prom night, "I've been invited to present this material at the National Conference on Community Safety next month. They want me to speak about youth perspectives on financial fraud prevention and community resilience." The invitation to speak at a national conference had arrived just days earlier, the result of news coverage about Riverside's systematic approach to recovering from Marcus's operation. Luna had initially been terrified by the prospect of speaking to hundreds of law enforcement professionals and community leaders, but she'd realized that sharing Riverside's experience could help protect other communities from similar exploitation. "You've turned a terrible experience into something that could help thousands of people," Agent Martinez observed. "That takes remarkable strength and maturity." Luna wasn't sure about remarkable strength, but she did feel different from the girl who had worried about corsages and prom photos just a month earlier. The experience of being systematically deceived and then working to understand and prevent similar deceptions had given her a sense of purpose that felt more substantial than anything she'd planned for college. 6 months later, Luna stood in the Riverside High School auditorium, where she'd performed in school plays and attended graduation ceremonies, looking out at an audience of 200 community members who had come to hear her presentation about financial fraud prevention and community safety protocols. The same stage where she'd been crowned homecoming queen in October now served as the platform for her to share lessons learned from one of the most difficult experiences of her life. "Trust is not naivety," Luna said, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system. "Trust is a strength that builds communities and relationships. But trust can be protected through education, verification, and healthy skepticism. We don't have to choose between being welcoming and being safe." In the audience, she could see her parents, Celeste, Mia, Jake, and dozens of other community members whose lives had been affected by Marcus's deception. Some of them were families who had experienced financial fraud. Others were neighbors who had felt their sense of security shaken by the realization that someone had been systematically exploiting their community for months. All of them were part of Riverside's ongoing effort to rebuild trust while protecting themselves from future exploitation. "The most important thing I've learned," Luna continued, "is that when someone violates our trust, we have a choice. We can let that violation make us suspicious and closed off, or we can use it as an opportunity to build stronger, smarter communities. Riverside chose to get stronger." After her presentation, Luna stood in the auditorium lobby answering questions and talking with community members about ongoing safety initiatives. The conversation felt different from the desperate crisis meetings they'd held in the weeks after prom night. More hopeful, more forward-looking, more focused on building something better than what they'd lost. "Miss Rodriguez?" called a voice from across the lobby. Luna turned to see a young woman about her age approaching with a notebook and press credentials. "I'm Jennifer Walsh from the State University Journalism Program. I'd like to interview you about your community education work for a feature article we're doing about youth leadership in crisis recovery." Luna smiled, remembering when media attention had felt threatening and invasive. Now she understood that sharing Riverside's story could help other communities prepare for and recover from similar situations. The girl who had once hidden from news cameras was now actively seeking opportunities to educate and advocate. "I'd be happy to talk with you, but I want to make sure the focus stays on community solutions rather than personal drama. What happened here isn't really about my relationship with Marcus. It's about how communities can protect themselves while maintaining the trust and openness that make them special." Luna adjusted the microphone at the podium in the FBI's training academy, looking out at 200 federal agents, local law enforcement officers, and community leaders who had gathered for the National Conference on Financial Crime Prevention. The conference room in Quantico, Virginia, was a far cry from the Riverside High School gymnasium where her story had begun, but the purpose felt connected: protecting communities from people who would exploit their trust and generosity. 2 years ago, I was a 17-year-old girl getting ready for prom. I thought my biggest challenge would be avoiding stepping on my date's feet during our slow dance. I had no idea that my boyfriend was actually a 22-year-old criminal operative whose real name I'd never learned, or that our relationship was part of a systematic operation to exploit my entire community. The audience was attentive and engaged, many of them taking notes as Luna outlined the timeline of Marcus's infiltration into Riverside and the community's comprehensive response to the crisis. Over the past 2 years, she'd refined her presentation to focus on actionable
Intelligence that could help law enforcement and community leaders identify similar operations before they caused extensive damage. "The key insight," Luna continued, "is that these operations rely on exploiting normal human emotions and social structures. Marcus wasn't successful because the people of Riverside were unusually naive. He was successful because he was professionally trained to identify and manipulate the exact qualities that make communities strong: trust, generosity, and willingness to welcome newcomers."
After her presentation, Luna was approached by Agent Sarah Kim from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, a woman about 30 years old with kind eyes and an intensity that reminded Luna of Agent Martinez from that terrible night at prom. Ms. Rodriguez, your work on community education protocols has been influential across multiple agencies. We've adapted your early warning system for use in over a dozen states. Luna felt a surge of satisfaction that had become familiar over the past 2 years. The knowledge that her painful experience was helping protect other families and communities from similar violations. The educational materials she'd developed in the aftermath of Marcus's arrest had evolved into a comprehensive training program that was being implemented by law enforcement agencies, community organizations, and financial institutions across the country. I'm curious about your future plans, Agent Kim continued. Have you considered a career in federal law enforcement? Your combination of personal experience, community leadership skills, and educational background would make you an excellent candidate for our financial crimes division. The suggestion was flattering and not entirely unexpected. Luna had been approached by several federal agencies over the past year as her reputation in the financial crime prevention field had grown. But she'd also been accepted to State University's new program in community psychology and crime prevention, an interdisciplinary major that had been created partially in response to the innovative recovery work happening in communities like Riverside. I start college in the fall, Luna said, but I'm definitely interested in federal law enforcement as a long-term career goal. I want to finish my undergraduate degree first, and I want to keep working with Riverside's ongoing community safety initiatives. Agent Kim handed her a business card and contact information. We'll be here when you're ready. The FBI is always looking for people who understand both the human cost of financial crime and the systematic approaches needed to prevent it. After the conference, Luna took the train back to Riverside, watching familiar landscapes roll past the windows as she processed the day's conversations and connections. The girl who had once been terrified by the prospect of leaving her hometown for college was now traveling regularly for speaking engagements and professional conferences, but Riverside remained her anchor and her inspiration. The train pulled into Riverside's small station at sunset, the golden light casting long shadows across the platform where her mother waited with a warm smile and a tight hug. The station looked the same as it had throughout Luna's childhood, but she knew that underneath the familiar exterior, Riverside had changed in profound ways. Stronger, more aware, more prepared to protect itself while maintaining the community spirit that made it special. How did the presentation go? Her mother asked as they drove downtown Riverside, past businesses and landmarks that had been part of Luna's entire life. The Italian restaurant where she had planned to have dinner with Marcus after prom was still operating, but it had new security protocols for credit card processing. The high school where she had fallen for Marcus's carefully constructed lies now had comprehensive identity verification procedures for all volunteers and student workers. Really well, Luna said. I think we're making a difference. The FBI is adapting our community education protocols for national use, and I got contacted by representatives from 3 other communities that have experienced similar operations. They drove past Miller's Beach where Marcus had held Celeste hostage 2 years ago. The location had been transformed from a place of trauma into something more complicated. Still beautiful, still meaningful to the community, but now also a reminder of how vulnerable trust could be and how important it was to protect it wisely.
Celeste is graduating next week, her mother said, navigating the familiar streets toward their house on Maple Avenue. She's been accepted to 3 different universities for criminal justice programs. She says she wants to specialize in victim advocacy and trauma counseling. Luna smiled, thinking about how her sister had channeled her experience into a passion for helping others recover from similar violations of trust. Celeste had spent the past 2 years volunteering with local support groups, mentoring families affected by financial fraud, and working with law enforcement to develop victim-centered approaches to financial crime investigation. The flirtatious, carefree girl who had unwittingly become involved in a federal investigation had evolved into a focused young woman with a clear mission. She's stronger than any of us realized, Luna said,
watching the sunset paint Riverside's familiar neighborhoods in golden light, including herself. Their house on Maple Avenue looked exactly the same from the outside. The same blue shutters her father painted every 3 years, the same flower garden her mother tended with obsessive care, the same front porch where Marcus had picked Luna up for prom in what felt like another lifetime. But the security system was new, the mail was delivered to a post office box instead of their home address, and their financial accounts were monitored by fraud detection services that most families in Riverside had never needed before Marcus's operation. Inside, the house still felt like home, but it was a home that had learned to be more careful. Family photos lined the hallway, including several from Luna's high school graduation, a ceremony that had taken place just weeks after the FBI investigation concluded, with increased security and a speech from Principal Morrison about resilience and community strength that everyone understood was really about Marcus and what they'd all survived together. "Dinner's almost ready," Luna's father called from the kitchen, where he was finishing preparations for what had become their weekly family meal, a tradition they'd started after the crisis to ensure they stayed connected despite their busy schedules. "Celeste should be here any minute. She's bringing Jake and Mia." Luna felt a flutter of anticipation at the mention of Jake's name. Their relationship had developed slowly and carefully over the past year, built on a foundation of shared experience and mutual respect that felt completely different from the intense but ultimately hollow romance she'd thought she'd had with Marcus. Jake understood her wariness about trust, her need to verify rather than simply believe, her commitment to protecting their community from future exploitation. He'd been patient with her healing process and supportive of her career goals in ways that felt genuine rather than calculated. "Any word from the Martinez family about their recovery?" Luna asked, helping her mother set the table with the good china they'd started using for weekly dinners, another small change that reflected their increased appreciation for family time and shared moments. "They're doing much better," her mother said. "The bank was able to reverse all the unauthorized transactions, and Mr. Martinez says their credit score has actually improved since they started monitoring it so carefully. But Mrs. Martinez still gets anxious when she has to provide personal information over the phone, even to legitimate businesses." Luna understood that anxiety intimately. Even 2 years later, she found herself hyper-alert to requests for personal information, suspicious of charming strangers who seemed too interested in her family's business, careful about what she shared on social media or in casual conversation. The hypervigilance was probably excessive now, but it felt like necessary protection against the kind of systematic deception that nearly destroyed her community. The front door opened with the familiar sound of Celeste's laughter mixing with Jake and Mia's voices as they arrived for dinner. Luna heard her sister calling out greetings and compliments about the food smells, the same warm energy that had made Celeste so popular in high school, but now tempered with an awareness of how dangerous charm could be when it was weaponized by the wrong people. "Luna!" Celeste burst into the dining room, radiant in the way that had always made her magnetic, but now carried an undertone of hard-earned wisdom. At 19, she was still beautiful and outgoing, but there was steel underneath the sparkle that hadn't been there before.
Marcus, how did the FBI conference go? Did you convince them to hire you when you graduate? "They're interested," Luna said, embracing her sister with the fierce affection that had grown even stronger since their shared trauma. "But I want to finish my degree first, and I want to see how our community safety program develops over the next few years." Jake appeared in the doorway, looking handsome in the understated way that had always appealed to Luna. No flashy charm or calculated charisma, just genuine kindness and quiet intelligence that felt completely trustworthy because it never tried too hard. "How was Quantico?" he asked, kissing her cheek with the gentle affection they'd built over months of careful courtship. "Intense, but good," Luna said. "I think we're really making a difference. The protocols we developed here in Riverside are being adapted by communities across the country." Mia joined them carrying a bottle of wine and looking elegant in the way she'd grown into since starting college at State University, where she was studying business administration with a focus on financial security. "I brought champagne," she announced. "We're celebrating Luna's success and Celeste's graduation and the fact that we all survived senior year despite dating a federal criminal." It was the kind of dark humor they'd all developed as a coping mechanism, the ability to joke about the trauma that had reshaped their lives without minimizing its impact or pretending it hadn't mattered. During dinner, Luna found herself thinking about the path that had brought her to this moment. 2 years ago, she'd been a naive 17-year-old whose biggest worry was whether her prom dress photographs would turn out well. Tonight, she was a 20-year-old college student who'd spoken at the FBI's National Training Conference, developed educational protocols that were being used to protect communities across the country, and been offered provisional employment with federal law enforcement agencies. The transformation had been painful, but ultimately empowering. Marcus's deception had shattered her innocence, but it had also revealed strengths she hadn't known she possessed. The ability to turn personal trauma into community service, to channel anger and betrayal into systematic solutions, to build trust carefully and deliberately rather than giving it freely and carelessly. "I've been thinking about what you said about trust," Celeste said during dessert, referring to Luna's presentation from the previous week, "about how it's not naive if it's protected by education and awareness. I think that's true for romantic relationships, too. I don't want to be suspicious of every guy I meet, but I also don't want to ignore warning signs the way we all did with Marcus." Luna nodded, understanding exactly what her sister meant. The challenge for all of them was finding the balance between healthy skepticism and paralyzing distrust, between protecting themselves from future Marcuses while remaining open to genuine connections with trustworthy people. "The difference is having standards and boundaries," Jake said, his insight reflecting the thoughtfulness that Luna found so attractive about him. Marcus violated normal boundaries constantly, but he was so charming about it that it felt flattering rather than invasive. Now we know what healthy relationship behavior actually looks like. Luna squeezed Jake's hand under the table, grateful for his patience with her sometimes excessive need for verification and transparency. Their relationship had developed slowly, with Jake providing references from friends who'd known him for years, sharing family contact information, and being completely open about his background, finances, and future plans. It might have seemed excessive to outsiders, but for Luna, it represented the foundation of genuine trust built on verified information rather than blind faith. After dinner, Luna and Jake walked through downtown Riverside, past the businesses and landmarks that had been part of her entire life but now carried additional layers of meaning. The community center, where she'd first presented her financial fraud prevention materials. The bank, where several families had discovered unauthorized account activity. The coffee shop, where Marcus had charmed local business owners while secretly cataloging their financial vulnerabilities.
Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Agent Martinez hadn't been at the prom that night? Jake asked as they paused in front of Riverside High School, its familiar brick buildings looking peaceful in the evening light. All the time, Luna admitted. If the FBI investigation had taken longer to identify Marcus, if they hadn't realized he was using prom as a distraction for something bigger, if Celeste hadn't been there for him to grab as a hostage, so many things could have gone differently. They walked past the gymnasium, where Luna's prom had been transformed from a fairy tale evening into the center of a federal investigation. The building looked ordinary now, but Luna could still remember the shock of seeing FBI agents questioning students in formal wear, the surreal experience of watching her romantic dreams collapse while her community's safety hung in the balance. "I'm proud of who you've become," Jake said, stopping to face her under the streetlight where they'd had their first real conversation about trust and healing 6 months after prom night. "You took something terrible and turned it into something that's protecting thousands of people. That takes incredible strength. Luna appreciated his words, but she wasn't sure strength was the right description for what she'd done. Survival, maybe. Determination to prevent other families from experiencing what hers had gone through. A stubborn refusal to let Marcus's lies define her future or limit her dreams. I keep thinking about something Agent Martinez told me, Luna said, leaning against Jake's familiar warmth as they watched late evening joggers and dog walkers navigate the streets where she'd grown up. He said that most people are exactly who they say they are and that Marcus was an exception rather than the rule. I'm trying to believe that while still being smart about protection. It was an ongoing challenge, maintaining faith in human goodness while acknowledging that some people were professionally trained to exploit that faith. Luna had learned to trust her instincts, verify important information, and maintain healthy boundaries. But she'd also worked hard not to let Marcus's deception make her cynical about love and relationships in general. "Have you thought about what you want to do after graduation?" Jake asked, referring to the various opportunities Luna was considering for her post-college career. "I'm leaning toward federal law enforcement," Luna said, the decision becoming clearer as she spoke it aloud. "But I want to specialize in community-based prevention programs rather than just investigation and prosecution. I think the most important work happens before crimes are committed, not after." The philosophy had developed from Luna's experience watching Riverside recover from Marcus's operation. While catching and prosecuting criminals was important, the more meaningful work involved helping communities develop the awareness and protocols needed to protect themselves from systematic exploitation. The FBI agent I talked to today said they're developing a new program that combines traditional law enforcement with community education and prevention. It sounds like exactly what I want to do, work with communities to identify vulnerabilities before they're exploited. Jake smiled, the expression carrying pride and affection that felt completely genuine after 2 years of careful relationship building. "You're going to be amazing at that. You understand both sides, what it feels like to be deceived by someone you trust, and how communities can get stronger instead of just more suspicious." They walked back toward Luna's house, past the familiar neighborhoods where she'd grown up feeling safe and protected. That innocence was gone forever, replaced by awareness that even small towns could be targeted by sophisticated criminal operations. But the loss of naivety had been balanced by the development of genuine strength, practical knowledge, and a sense of purpose that felt more meaningful than anything she'd planned before Marcus entered and exited her life. At her front door, Jake kissed her goodnight with the gentle affection that had become their comfortable rhythm. No dramatic passion or overwhelming intensity, just steady warmth,
Mutual respect that felt sustainable and trustworthy in ways Luna hadn't understood were possible before Marcus taught her the difference between genuine connection and skilled manipulation. "I love you," Jake said, the words carrying weight because they'd taken months to develop and had been tested by Luna's wariness and need for verification. "I love you too," Luna replied, meeting it completely and without reservation, perhaps the first time she'd been able to say those words since Marcus without immediate anxiety about whether she was being deceived again. Inside, Luna found her parents and Celeste cleaning up from dinner. Their conversation focused on Celeste's upcoming graduation and plans for college. The family dynamic had grown stronger since their shared crisis, with all of them more intentional about communication, more appreciative of their time together, and more committed to protecting each other without becoming isolated or suspicious. "Luna," her father said, looking up from loading the dishwasher, "there's something your mother and I wanted to discuss with you. We've been talking about establishing a foundation to fund financial literacy education in small communities. We want you to be involved in the development and leadership." The suggestion surprised Luna, though she realized it shouldn't have. Her parents had been affected by Marcus's operation in ways that went beyond the immediate financial and emotional impact. Like Luna, they'd channeled their experience into a determination to prevent other families from being similarly victimized. The Rodriguez Family Foundation for Community Financial Security, her mother added, showing Luna a folder of preliminary planning documents. We want to provide grants for educational programs, support for families recovering from financial fraud, and resources for communities developing protection protocols. Luna looked through the documents, impressed by the scope and thoughtfulness of her parents' planning. The foundation would fund exactly the kind of community-based prevention work that Luna was most passionate about, creating sustainable programs that could protect families across the country from systematic exploitation. "I'd love to be involved," Luna said, feeling a surge of excitement about the possibility of expanding their impact beyond Riverside. This could help so many communities develop the kind of awareness and protection we've built here. Celeste looked up from wiping down the kitchen counter, her face bright with enthusiasm. "Can I help too? I'm going to be studying victim advocacy in college, and I want to understand the prevention side as well as the recovery process." The idea of working together as a family to turn their painful experience into systematic protection for other communities felt like the perfect evolution of their shared trauma. Instead of being defined by what Marcus had done to them, they were choosing to be defined by how they'd responded and what they'd built in the aftermath. Later that night, Luna sat at her desk in her childhood bedroom, working on the final draft of an article she was writing for a national law enforcement magazine about community-based approaches to preventing financial crime. The room still contained artifacts from her high school years, photos from school events, awards from academic competitions, books she'd loved as a teenager, but it also held the documentation of everything she'd become since prom night. Files from her work with the Community Safety Task Force sat next to college textbooks on psychology and criminology. Speaking notes from her presentations at law enforcement conferences were mixed with letters from families who had used Riverside's educational materials to protect themselves from potential fraud. The girl who had once worried about prom corsages now maintained correspondence with FBI agents, community leaders, and prevention specialists across the country. Her phone buzzed with a text from Agent Martinez, who had remained a mentor and supporter throughout Luna's development into a national expert on community-based crime prevention. "Saw the news coverage from your Quantico presentation. Outstanding work, as always. The Bureau's new Community Protection Initiative is moving forward, and we want you involved from the beginning. Call me when you have time to discuss opportunities." Luna smiled, setting the phone aside to finish her article. The opportunities were exciting, but she'd learned to be deliberate about her choices, rather than rushing toward impressive-sounding positions. The girl who had trusted Marcus completely and immediately now took time to research, verify, and carefully consider every major decision. 3 months later, Luna stood on the stage of Riverside High School's auditorium, wearing her college cap and gown as the keynote speaker for the graduation ceremony of the class that had been freshmen when her prom night changed everything. The auditorium was packed with families who had lived through Marcus's operation and its aftermath, creating a sense of shared experience and collective resilience that felt different from typical graduation ceremonies. 4 years ago, Luna began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. Your class entered high school in a community that had just learned some difficult lessons about trust, safety, and resilience. You've grown up in a Riverside that was stronger and more aware because it had been tested and had chosen to get better rather than just more suspicious. In the audience, Luna could see her parents, Celeste, Jake, Mia, and dozens of other faces that had been part of her life before, during, and after Marcus. Agent Martinez sat in the back row, having driven from the regional FBI office to support Luna's latest speaking engagement. The community that had been victimized by systematic deception had become a community of advocates and protectors, sharing their hard-won wisdom with others who might face similar challenges. The most important thing you can learn from our experience, Luna continued, is that resilience isn't about becoming closed off or suspicious. It's about becoming stronger and smarter, more capable of protecting yourselves and others without losing your ability to trust and connect with genuine people.
After the ceremony, Luna mingled with graduating students and their families, many of whom had been directly affected by Marcus's operation but had used the experience to become more engaged with community safety and education initiatives. The trauma that could have divided and weakened Riverside had instead created a network of people committed to preventing similar exploitation in other communities. "Miss Rodriguez?" called a familiar voice. Luna turned to see Sarah Kim, now a college senior studying cybersecurity, approaching with her parents. "I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for our family and our community. The educational programs you developed helped my parents understand identity protection in ways that have kept them safe from other potential fraud attempts." Luna hugged Sarah, remembering the fear and confusion of those first days after prom night, when they'd all been trying to understand the scope of Marcus's operation. The Kim family had been among the hardest hit financially, but they'd also become some of the most active volunteers in Riverside's ongoing community protection efforts. "How's the cybersecurity program going?" Luna asked, genuinely interested in Sarah's studies and career plans. "Really well," Sarah said, her excitement evident. "I'm specializing in community-based approaches to online safety education. I want to help small towns like Riverside understand digital vulnerabilities the same way you've helped them understand financial fraud risks." The conversation represented everything Luna hoped would continue emerging from their shared experience. Young people who had been affected by Marcus's deception choosing careers focused on protecting others from similar exploitation. The trauma that could have made them victims permanently was instead making them advocates and protectors. As the evening wound down, Luna walked through downtown Riverside one more time before returning to college for her final semester. The familiar streets and buildings carried layers of meaning now, sites of innocence and deception, crisis and recovery, trauma and resilience. The community that had been mapped by criminals as a target for exploitation had become a model for other towns seeking to balance welcome and security. Her phone buzzed with a message from the FBI's Community Protection Initiative. "Luna, we've received approval to establish a new position focused on developing community-based financial crime prevention programs. The role would involve traveling to our-risk communities, developing
Educational protocols and training local law enforcement in prevention strategies. Are you interested in discussing this opportunity after you graduate?" Luna paused under the streetlight where she'd walked with Jake countless times over the past 2 years, considering the offer that represented everything she'd been working towards since prom night. A career focused on preventing other communities from experiencing what Riverside had lived through, using her painful personal experience to create systematic protection for families across the country. She typed back, "Very interested. Let's schedule a call for next week." Looking up at the familiar stars above Riverside, Luna felt a sense of completion and anticipation that would have been unimaginable on the night when her world had collapsed in a high school gymnasium. The girl who had been devastated by discovering her boyfriend was a federal criminal had become a young woman whose expertise was sought by national law enforcement agencies. The journey from victim to advocate had been painful and complicated, but it had also been purposeful and meaningful in ways that Luna's original plans for college and career could never have been. Marcus Volkov had tried to exploit her community's trust for criminal gain, but his operation had ultimately created a network of protectors and educators whose impact would extend far beyond the damage he'd intended to inflict. 2 weeks later, Luna submitted her senior thesis on Community-Based Approaches to Financial Crime Prevention, Lessons from Riverside, officially completing her degree in community psychology and crime prevention. The thesis incorporated 2 years of practical experience with theoretical frameworks, case studies from her work with the Community Safety Task Force, and recommendations for implementing similar programs in communities across the country. Her graduation from State University was attended by her family, Jake, Mia, Agent Martinez, and several community leaders from Riverside who had worked with Luna on various prevention initiatives. The ceremony felt like a celebration, not just of Luna's academic achievements, but of the community's collective recovery and growth since Marcus's arrest. After graduation, Luna moved to Washington, D.C. to begin her position with the FBI's Community Protection Initiative, specializing in developing and implementing community-based prevention programs for financial crimes. Her first assignment was working with a small town in Oregon that had been infiltrated by an operation similar to Marcus's, helping them develop educational protocols and community response strategies based on Riverside's experience. The work was challenging and meaningful, involving travel to communities across the country that were dealing with various forms of systematic exploitation. Each assignment reinforced Luna's understanding that Marcus's operation in Riverside had been part of a much larger pattern of criminal activity that targeted small towns specifically because of their trusting, welcoming nature. 6 months into her FBI career, Luna received a call that connected her past and present in an unexpected way. Agent Martinez, now promoted to head the Bureau's Financial Crimes Division, needed Luna's expertise for a special assignment. "We've identified a network similar to the one Marcus was part of," he explained during their secure phone call. "They're operating in the Pacific Northwest, targeting communities with profiles similar to Riverside's. We want you to go undercover as a community education specialist to identify their methods and help us develop intervention strategies." The assignment would involve Luna posing as a recent college graduate interested in community safety work, allowing her to observe and document how criminal networks identified and infiltrated target communities. Her personal experience with Marcus's deception would be crucial for recognizing the subtle signs of systematic manipulation that other agents might miss. "Are you comfortable with this type of assignment?" Agent Martinez asked, understanding the emotional complexity of asking Luna to enter a situation that might trigger memories of her own victimization. "I'm ready," Luna said, surprising herself with how confident she felt. The work was exactly what she'd been training for, using her experience with Marcus to protect other communities from similar exploitation. The girl who had been deceived was now capable of identifying and countering the deception tactics that had once fooled her completely.
3 years after prom night, Luna stood in the town square of Cedar Falls, Oregon, a community of 8,000 people that reminded her painfully of Riverside. The same mix of local businesses and chain stores, the same friendly residents who waved at strangers, the same sense of security that made communities like this attractive targets for criminal operations. Her cover identity as Luna Chen, a recent college graduate developing educational materials about community safety, allowed her to attend town meetings, interview local business owners, and observe social dynamics without attracting suspicion. Within 2 weeks, she'd identified 3 individuals who were exhibiting behavior patterns consistent with systematic intelligence gathering. The lead suspect, a man calling himself David Parker, who claimed to be a freelance marketing consultant, displayed the same calculated charm that Luna remembered from Marcus. He was attending every community event, asking detailed questions about local families and businesses, and developing relationships with trusted community members who could provide access to sensitive information. But unlike her 17-year-old self, Luna could see through the performance. She recognized the way David's questions were designed to elicit specific types of information, the way he deflected inquiries about his own background, the way he positioned himself to overhear conversations between community leaders about local financial situations. "David's been very interested in our upcoming fundraising campaign for the new community center," mentioned Mrs. Patterson, the elderly volunteer coordinator who would become one of Luna's key sources of information about community dynamics. "He keeps offering to help with donor outreach and financial planning, even though we barely know him." Luna made careful notes about David's behavior, documenting the same pattern of infiltration and intelligence gathering that Marcus had used in Riverside. But this time, instead of being the unknowing victim, she was the federal agent working to prevent the exploitation before it could cause widespread damage. The undercover assignment lasted 6 weeks and resulted in the arrest of David Parker and 2 associates before they could implement the financial fraud scheme they'd been developing. The preventative interventions saved the Cedar Falls community from experiencing the trauma and financial damage that Riverside had endured, validating Luna's belief that community-based prevention was more effective than post-crime investigation and prosecution. Outstanding work, Agent Martinez told Luna during her debriefing at the Portland FBI office. Your ability to recognize the behavioral patterns and social manipulation tactics was crucial for identifying the operation before it could cause significant damage. Luna felt a profound sense of satisfaction knowing that her personal experience with Marcus's deception had directly prevented another community from being victimized. The trauma that had once felt meaningless and destructive had become the foundation for meaningful work that protected innocent families from systematic exploitation. On her 30th birthday, 10 years after prom night, Luna stood before the Senate Judiciary Committee as President Biden's nominee to head the newly created Department of Community Financial Security, a federal agency focused on preventing and responding to systematic financial crimes that target small communities. Senator Williams, Luna addressed the committee chair during her confirmation hearing, my experience in Riverside, Oregon, and dozens of other communities has taught me that prevention is more effective than prosecution when it comes to protecting families from financial exploitation. The agency I hope to lead would focus on education, early intervention, and community-based protection strategies. In the gallery behind her, she could see her parents, now in their 60s and still actively involved with the Rodriguez Family Foundation. Celeste, who had become a nationally recognized expert in victim advocacy and trauma counseling, sat next to Jake, who had married Luna in a small ceremony 5 years earlier. Mia, now a successful financial advisor specializing in fraud prevention, had flown in from California to support Luna's confirmation hearing. Miss Rodriguez, asked Senator Chen, how do you respond to critics who argue that your approach is too soft on financial criminals, that communities need stronger prosecutorial responses rather than educational programs?
Luna had anticipated the question and had a response based on a decade of practical experience in community-based crime prevention. Senator, prosecution is absolutely important, and we must hold criminals accountable for their actions. But by the time we're prosecuting someone like Marcus Volkov, the damage to communities and families has already been done. Our most effective strategy is preventing that damage through education, awareness, and early intervention programs. The confirmation hearing lasted 6 hours and covered Luna's extensive experience in federal law enforcement, her academic credentials in community psychology and criminology, and her track record of developing successful prevention programs that had been implemented in over 200 communities across the United States. 2 weeks later, Luna was sworn in as the first director of the Department of Community Financial Security, taking an oath to protect American families and communities from systematic financial exploitation. The ceremony was held in the Rose Garden, with President Biden noting Luna's unique combination of personal experience, professional expertise, and unwavering commitment to protecting the communities that make America strong. After the ceremony, Luna walked through downtown Washington with Jake, reflecting on the journey that had brought her from a devastated 17-year-old in a high school gymnasium to a senior federal official responsible for protecting communities across the country. Do you ever think about what Marcus would think if he could see you now? Jake asked, referring to the man whose crimes had inadvertently launched Luna's career in federal law enforcement. Sometimes, Luna admitted. He's serving 25 years in federal prison for his role in the identity theft network. I hope he realizes that his attempt to exploit our community ultimately created a system that's protecting thousands of other communities from people just like him. Marcus Volkov had been sentenced 8 years earlier after cooperating with federal prosecutors to provide information about the larger criminal network he'd been part of. His testimony had led to the prosecution of 47 other individuals involved in systematic financial fraud targeting small American communities, making the case one of the largest financial crime prosecutions in FBI history. The best revenge, Jake said, squeezing Luna's hand as they walked past the monuments and government buildings where she now worked, is building something better than what he tried to destroy. Luna smiled, thinking about the communities across America that were safer because of the programs she'd developed,
the families that had been protected from financial exploitation, the young people who had chosen careers in community protection after learning about Riverside's experience.